Welcome to today's episode. We are thrilled to introduce our guest, a seasoned expert with over 15 years of experience in the ever-evolving world of digital strategy. Currently, serving as the Chief Digital Officer at Belden Inc, leading digital transformations across key areas like master data management, sales automation, and e-commerce. His passion lies in leveraging cutting-edge technologies to drive business success and operational efficiency. From spearheading global digital marketing roadmaps and mastering the intersection of innovation and strategy, this expert has navigated the digital landscape with remarkable expertise. Please join us in welcoming Nick Wojdyla to the show. So, Nick, the first question that we have for you is your path from marketing to becoming Chief Transformation Officer is unique. What motivated you to transition into leading data transformation initiatives, and has your marketing background, which we know you have, influenced or helped you in driving technological changes in the company?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and yes, it was quite a long evolution to get from marketing to the role I'm in today. But yes, so I think early on, as a marketer, you're dependent on data, and so over time, you kind of get frustrated with having to rely or wait for other groups, other functions, IT, whoever in the organization to have the data in a state of readiness for you as a marketer to use it. So early in my career, I just started to solve data challenges, tried to figure it out myself, right, in early stages. So that's kind of what, got my foot in the door with the world of data. And then as I was able to kind of solve data challenges myself, then marketing became easier and it was just more self-sufficient. And yes, it does help with the strategy piece of it because marketing is typically on the front line, customer facing, and typically people in data are behind the curtain in a room somewhere. So knowing what it's like to be in front of the customer and having a customer experience focus helps when you start thinking about data and how it's going to be applied. So it definitely, helps. For sure.
So I could see that you mentioned a very important point that it is always about that challenge of having access to data. You coming from a business team, and another thing is like the customer facing part which you mentioned. So I'm sure you must have had your set of initial challenges when you first moved into the tech transformation and data space. So what advice would you give to other business leaders who are looking to make a similar transition, and what set of initial challenges did you face?
Yeah, I think you need to be curious and you need to start exploring and understanding technology and data and how it works, right? And it depends on the current role you're in. So again, if you're in marketing or sales or something to that effect, you likely have a strong foundation of the customer experience and understanding what the end result needs to be. But then you need to start educating yourself on kind of the nuts and bolts and the how that transpires through technology and through data. And some people will do that exploration and then quickly find they're not interested, it's not for them. Some people see it and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this existed. I kind of want to pivot into this. And then some roles like myself early in my career, it's like, oh, I want to do both. I want to do the front end stuff still, but I also want to have more control of the back end. And that's a really good complement to one another, but it's also a good skill set to have because then you're much more diverse in what you can bring to a company, bring to an organization. And any technology or data decision should be led by the customer experience, the business strategy, and the objective. And if you've only been in the world of data or only been in the world of technology, you tend to forget about that. And you tend to just focus on the technology or on the data, and it becomes a technology project as opposed to a business project that has some benefit to the customer, and then technology just enables it, right? Yeah.
That's a very fair point. But how did you find out that you mentioned that people have to find out whether you want to do both, both the things or just the business and strategy side of things? So were there any specific one or two things that you did experiment with and then you came to conclusion that, hey, I want to do both?
Yeah, so early on, early 2000s, I forget the year, this is when like websites were becoming more, mandatory for businesses. I mean, this is a time where there's businesses that didn't have websites, or they did, and it was managed by like the IT department. Yes. So if you wanted like a word change on your website, you had to put in an IT ticket. This is like a long time ago, right? And so, straying from that and saying, hey, we need to be self-sufficient as marketing or sales, and we need to edit our own site. We need our site to look better. That was the first project I got into where I said, well, let me try my hand at coding and development, and having little experience, but never have done it formally. So kind of learned as I went and figured it out. I had some IT developer partners that kind of helped me with some code when I got stuck and all of that. So they were really good mentors from that standpoint, but ultimately successfully developed a brand new website, then said, oh, what about mobile? Because that was also becoming a trend. So developed a mobile app that went into the app store, and it started generating revenue for the company. We had you could schedule service and all these activities, right? So as I did that exercise, I said, oh, I like this. This is development, technical. There's a data element too, because we're capturing contact information from a customer, we're storing it, we're personalizing based on that information. So there's a data element, and then you're still doing the creative UI, UX, look and feel, content, etc. of what the customer sees, right? So doing that was fun. And then I also noticed, at least at the time, that there was hardly anyone who could do both of those things. People were either on the creative side and understood the technology not at all, or they were very technical and had no idea how to apply it to something that becomes real. So the fact that I could do both, that was kind of the aha moment I had in my career, where I was like, ooh, I'm going to do this, because no one else seems to be able to do both.
Nice. So I think the technology people listening to this podcast, I would say that you need to understand the business problems. And for the business folks, I think you need to say that you need to understand a bit of tech on hands-on, like you did.
Absolutely. Yeah, certainly wouldn't hurt.
Nice. And I want to, so there is this discussion always that how much technology should a business guy know, and how much business the technology guy should know?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think if you're on the technology side, I mean, you need to understand the primary business objectives or the business strategy. And usually it's a multi-year strategy the business has. So you need to understand those top level KPIs or metrics that the company has. And maybe there's a tier or two below that. You need to understand what those are, why they're important, and how you contribute to enable all of them or some of them, because that can be your North Star. So as you get bogged down in your day-to-day, you can quickly check yourself against to say, is the work I'm doing relevant to any of these, or did I go down a rabbit hole and I'm just working on something that doesn't ladder up to any of these business objectives? So you at least need to understand them. And are you adding value? Are you enabling them? Or are you working on some side project that's irrelevant? On the reverse side, if you're on the business side, you need to understand, what at a high level, what the technology is capable of, and that things are possible. You don't have to know how it works, because you yourself aren't going to develop it or program it or anything like that. But you do need to understand what's feasible. So then when you talk, if you're on the business side and you're talking to the technical side, two things. One, that if you know it's feasible, then you know that they're not going to come back to say it can't be done, because then you challenge them a little bit on that, right? Perhaps. But then also, the more experience you have, if they come back and say, oh, that's going to take 12 months, you can say, it should take 4. So again, you kind of have to be in a unique position to know enough to challenge that. But at a minimum, I would say if you're in the business, you need to understand, what AI is capable of, what, these CRM systems and data systems are capable of at a high level. You don't need to understand the nuts and bolts. That gets very technical very quick. A lot of people just don't have the aptitude for that, or, it's hard to do everything. But I would say the other side is actually arguably more important. Having the technical team or the data team aware of the business goals and objectives and ensure that they're enabling them somehow. That's if you can only have one-way street, I would rather have that than the business knowing the technology and then the tech people having no idea what the business objectives are.
Right, very, very true. And I think that also brings the focus and the value which you were mentioning about. So the next question is, I'm sure that while you were doing your job, you must have come across a process of evaluating AI opportunities in manufacturing. Or there is someone listening, business leader listening in their sectors, so they may be looking right now for finding out where you can apply AI and get some real value out of that. So how do you determine which AI use cases to pursue first, and how do you measure success?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So my approach is kind of the reverse. So it's not saying, hey, there's this thing called AI. Where can I use it or how can I use it? I actually don't care about AI at first. I say, what's my business challenge and what's my problem? And there's usually multiple ways to solve it. How am I going to solve it? And I start kind of like, it's like a diagnostic tree of like, what do I need to do to solve it? And sometimes I don't need AI to solve it. Sometimes I do. Sometimes you could use AI, but it's overkill. Like you don't need a chainsaw to cut a steak. So it's like, you could use AI to do this, but there's other ways to do it faster, cheaper, etc. So I think it's, again, starting with the business objective, the outcome you're trying to have, and then kind of, storyboarding, the different ways that you can solve for it. Typically data's the element first of like, what's the data readiness? Do I have the data, et cetera? Is there a challenge there? And then eventually as you work, kind of the last component is the technology component. And that's where you say, okay, does AI help? Does it complement it? Is it overkill? Do I not need it at all? And then that drives it. So then the ones where you're like, yes, absolutely need AI, or this isn't possible, then those are the use cases you kind of start with first. If it's AI is kind of can complement it, then you might POC some of that stuff. But then there's a lot of times where we even get requests from the business, and this happens at any company, where they say, hey, we want to use AI to do XYZ, and you come back to say, oh, you don't need AI to do that. That's a very simple. It's just an algorithm. That's just a simple equation. That's not AI. AI is not necessary for that. So again, it's not, I guess the summary is, don't force fit any technology, AI or other, and try to make it work. Because again, you may not even need it.
Correct. That's a very fair assessment. We have also seen that sometimes there are simpler techniques compared to AI which solve the business problems, and sometimes you really need AI. So you need to strike the balance as per the business objectives that you are trying to solve. So follow-up question on this is, when you were doing these exercises of finding out these opportunities or executing the projects for artificial intelligence, were there any frameworks or processes that you also developed which you felt were unique from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say like a formal framework. I think this is on the topic of AI. It's still a fairly new frontier for most companies and even most, system integrators and partners, right? And so there's best practices and there's frameworks that are out there. But I think again, it's agnostic of whether the answer is AI or not. It's still business challenge. How do we solve for it? Data is usually the biggest conversation. It could be the pain point, or it could be the magic that you have. You have the data as in a state of readiness. And so that ends up usually being the first roadblock, honestly. Like you either don't have the data, or you do, but it's not complete, correct, quality, etc. Or you have the data, but you need to now complement it with third-party data and data outside of your ecosystem. And that's a big challenge. And so getting through that's the first piece. And then, should you need AI, then it's, okay, there's two elements of that. There's the brains, if you will, of like, okay, well, it's basically trying to mimic a human brain. So it's like, well, what would a person do to solve this problem? And then can AI just be programmed to do it faster or more repeatable? And then there's the delivery mechanism. So that's also important. So you can develop a really great AI system that works, but if your delivery mechanism isn't great, then you're not going to get adoption. So this is big with like salespeople. So if a salesperson is most of the day inside of Salesforce or inside of Name the System, you're better off trying to get the AI in there as opposed to giving them a separate AI widget that they'll forget about and they won't use it as not part of their like day-to-day habits. So the delivery mechanism is arguably just as important. Otherwise, you could build the greatest tool, and if it's not easy to use, if the user experience and the interface isn't great, and it's not intuitive, and it's not in the place where it needs to be for that persona, then it just won't get used, and then it's kind of all for nothing.
Right. So you made a very crucial point in that example of salespeople, and you develop something, and the widget is just lying there. So what I see a broader theme there is of stakeholder engagement, which is very crucial in transformation projects. So how do you build consensus among different departments when you work across operations, HR, or finance, especially when implementing new technologies?
Yeah, so I mean, we're doing a lot of that now with AI, right? So we're meeting with different parts of the business, and again, the easiest thing to do is kind of like shadow them, so to speak, to say, hey, what's a day in your life? What are all the different tasks and things you do? And you kind of document that. And then you say, okay, out of all these things, what are the things that you wish you didn't have to do? Because they're redundant, you do them a bunch, they're just, they're boring or whatever. And you say, great, those are probably best suited for some level of automation, potentially AI. And then whatever's left, you say, okay, this is more of the strategic, creative, difficult stuff. So if we could take half of this stuff off your plate, automate it, leverage AI, whatever the case might be, then you're just left with kind of, for you, the fun stuff, the challenging stuff, the creative stuff where you need a human and judgment and all those things. So if you do that exercise right, then it's easy buy-in, because then you mitigate the risk of them feeling that like a technology is going to take their job away. Because you say, no, we're just going to take away the boring stuff. You don't like doing this task 100 times a day, so just let the robot do it. You do the cool, fun stuff. And there's going to be more challenging things to do, so your plate will get full again, but with value-added, productive things, and all the boring, repetitive stuff, leave that to the systems. So typically the business likes that. I haven't come across anyone who's like, no, I like doing the boring, repetitive thing. People are very happy to offload that to anybody else. So that's usually a good jumping off point for AI and to prove value. And then as you evolve as a company, then even some of that strategic stuff, you can say, okay, maybe there's an AI assistant to not do it for them, but to complement and kind of give them an accelerator. And that's for more mature organizations. But I think eventually you get to that point as well.
You talked about that example where sometimes the stakeholders, they need sensitization that the boring things are going to get offloaded. So how do you, as a leader, sensitize the stakeholders when you are going for a deployment of an AI system or a user adoption guideline you come up with? So how do you do that?
Yeah, so if you do the beginning stages early and there's alignment on what the technology is going to do, then they've already bought into that. And then it's the details of the how. So they're going to want to see the quality output of the system that basically replicating what they used to do. So you have to do some UAT testing and having them involved to see the output, to see, look, it's doing just as good of a job, if not better, or meaning faster, more, it can do more times than you can. So then they're pretty comfortable. Then usually the other question is like, do I still have to monitor or do anything? And typically the answer is no. We set up guardrails and governance and process for that. So they usually end up being pretty happy with that. And then, again, the second scenario, and so that first scenario is more like, it's kind of automation where they don't have to do anything. You've just taken things away from them that they've agreed to, and it's happening over there. And they've also aligned with the quality of it is satisfactory, so they're not concerned. The second one that I talked about is when you give them something like an assistant to help with the more challenging stuff. That you need them involved in not the whole development piece, but when you start to get to the interface, back to the delivery mechanism, they need to be aligned with that. So like, where am I going to go to access this bot or this thing? What's it look like? Is it easy to use? What happens if it's wrong? These are all the questions they have. So you need to be proactive and get in front of them and make sure you answer all those. And again, through UAT and steering committees and things of that nature, you just bring them along with you. You never want to sit with the business, do that first exercise of like, here's what we're going to automate, here's what you're going to do, and then, okay, see you in 8 months. And then 8 months later, you say, here's the thing, because you could have missed it. So you just have to bring them along with you. It's not that difficult to do, and most of the time they're willing and excited to just be along and have visibility to the progress and all of that.
Right. So I think it's about what you said. So the key takeaway I see are the three, that you need to have that alignment at the beginning with the stakeholders, that what they are going to get and why you are building building the problem and how you are solving them. Then next is about telling them and involving them in the process of the UAT and the testing, which you mentioned about, and ultimately using it to see whether you really get the benefits or not,
Yeah.
and then reiterating upon that. So manufacturing, coming back to the domain where you are, so manufacturing, it has unique operational constraints. How do you identify and prioritize AI use cases that align with your company's strategic goals? Now we are more talking about the strategy, and any specific examples you may want to quote.
Yeah, so I've been in manufacturing my entire career, different companies, right? And so it's very similar. So most of the time, any manufacturing company, there's always a challenge around supply chain because you don't have visibility to everything. So you might have visibility to your direct suppliers, maybe the level between them, like an N1 kind of level, usually not even that. And you definitely don't have N2, 3, 4. So that creates challenges just holistically to say, okay, you might think, for example, that you have a diverse supply chain because you're like, oh, I have 8 suppliers that give me this widget. So if any of them go out or there's an issue, I'm fine. Well, maybe if all 8 of them share a single supplier, you're in trouble if that one goes out, because if they're in a place where there's a hurricane or whatever, they're done, the 8 are done, you're done. So it's a data thing. So how do you get visibility to that? And so visibility to it, number one, to know like, oh, I'm not as diverse as I think I am. Maybe I need, a 9th or 10th or change the 8 so they're not all sharing a single supplier in that made up scenario. But you also want the data to be able to do simulations to say, okay, here's my supply chain. I have these suppliers all over the place. Well, what happens if, there's a hurricane over here, or there's a war between these countries, or the price of whatever raw material goes up, and all these things. And then you can kind of get a feel for the revenue that's at risk, the customers of yours that would be impacted, kind of what's your mitigation plan to get through it. Being resilient, right, essentially is big in the manufacturing space. But I think, it's mostly a data component with the supply chain. And then there's also the layer of your own manufacturing, like your own operations of manufacturing, and how do you get something, very simply put, like through the line, fast and effectively and at scale and as automated as you can without, stoppages and downtime and quality issues, of course. But I think I see supply chain as always the biggest topic with any manufacturing company. Yeah.
So, but do you think that there have been softwares which have come up in the last 5 years or 10 years, which enterprises have started using for solving the supply chain issues, or you feel that since the visibility part and the data part, those are, so I'm trying to highlight the challenges which are still there in the industry, in the supply chain domain.
So there's tools out there for sure. It's usually a data problem within the company. So it's either their first party data is not to quality, or it's not harmonized. Like they have an issue in house with data, which a lot of companies do to various degrees. So there's that. But then there's finding the right external third-party data to augment and complement it with. And that's what the tools typically do, but it depends the tool, the tool you're using, they might be the tool, they don't have access to the third-party data, so they kind of outsource that to someone else. There's different places to get it from, the quality of that depends, so there's a lot of variables. So, usually you start with, having your own house in order. Is your data to quality? Is it as good as you can get it for at least a POC? But then you quickly have to find, well, what are my external third-party data sources, and are they trusted, and all of that? And then yes, the tool, there's a lot of them. They kind of bring it together, stitch it together. So that's arguably the simpler component. That's kind of the delivery mechanism of all that data into insights for the user. But then you have the change management adoption piece challenge, just like anything else. People are used to doing something a certain way for 10 years, and you give them a tool, they'll use it and then they'll kind of stray from it back to the old way of working. So you just constantly have to, as part of bringing them along as well, but then you have to have like hypercare. You have to kind of keep them, maybe a month after, be like, hey, how's it going? What do you like? What do you not like about it? And just kind of fine tune it and get it to a point till it's like, Microsoft Teams and they're just using it without thinking about it. It's just they're part of their habit, right? That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah, so I see from the technology side, the two challenges is one is the data, which is difficult to get, like you mentioned. Sometimes you need third-party data and the data is not there. You need data from your suppliers. There is, for example, weather visibility, the hurricane thing that you talked about. So that is one, and the adoption thing. So that is what is making it harder for the supply chain. I'm sure that whenever you implement these use cases in your company, then you kind of come across your evaluation of technology vendors. I'm sure you must be working with a lot of them. So what are your key criteria when evaluating technology vendors as a business leader? And also, what do you think about build versus buy decisions in data and AI projects? Like even in, for example, supply chain thing and the tools that we talked about.
Yeah, so for the first one, the way I've done it, it makes it easier. So if you already have, if the technology component is last, which for me it always is, then you already have your business case. You know exactly what you need to do. It's all mapped out. You just need the tool to do it. So when then you sit with a couple different vendors, you can be just put everything on the table. Say, I know exactly. I need something that can do this. Now, your tool may do it in a different way, but if these 5 things are the outcome, that's what I want to see. Show me how you do that. Then you go to another vendor. So usually do 3 or 4, different vendors and say, show me your version of getting to these results, as opposed to sitting with the technology first or too early, because then they're just going to pitch all the things that they can do, and you'll just want to grab all of them. Right? So if you come in there with a purpose to say, I already know what I want. It's like if you went to go buy a car. If you're like, I already know I want an SUV, I want a green one, I want this, show me what you have. If you just went in and said, I want a car, they'll show you a Ferrari, they'll show you a truck, they'll show you a motorcycle, and you will never make up your mind, right? Or you'll change your mind or whatever. So you need to come in there with a purpose. And so that's usually the first phase is number 1, can the tool do these things? The second one is, well, how do they do it? So can they do it more effectively than the next competitor? The third is, do they have any accelerators that go above and beyond what I'm expecting for maybe a future state? That's like a bonus. And then, cost is usually the last component. So usually when you talk to vendors, you talk to 4 of them, they're all within the same price. I mean, very rarely is one an outlier, high or low, but that could be like a final oddity that happens. But so anyway, that's the process I do, and it seemed to work throughout my career. And it makes the conversations easier. That way the vendor doesn't have to pitch their entire portfolio of 20 capabilities. It's like, focus on the 5 I care about. You can show me the other ones later, but like that's not part of the discussion. For AI, the buy versus build is interesting. So I would say my rule of thumb is if the use case is something that's already been done before, you're better off buying, right? Because you can always turn it on, turn it off, licenses up and down. The model's already been trained by name the company with all of their customers' data as a guide point. So you wouldn't be able to do that. So there's benefits there. Now, when you want to build, is typically when you want something that's a little more proprietary, long-term, or you have a very unique use case that's not an easy off-the-shelf grab. So if you want something more proprietary, you're gonna have to train your own models, you're gonna have to kind of build that knowledge base and do that. Now, sometimes what we'll do is we'll do quick builds, knowing that eventually we're gonna kind of migrate them to a buy. Yeah. So we're gonna do a quick build, POC, get it off the ground, get the adoption, and then we say, great, we're not going to continue to scale it in the build. We're going to go flip it to buy now, scale it there, and then move on to the next, POC. And then a couple things will live permanently in the build that are, again, very proprietary to your company and to your use case and are hyper-specific. But there's a big investment in the build, obviously not just the building piece, but the run and maintain and the care of it. I mean, you need data scientists and engineers and people who can do prompt engineering and testing. And if you were to outsource all that, it's far too expensive to do build. So you need more in-house. I would say you need in-house capabilities to do build, because you're going to outsource some, but you need in-house. To buy, you technically don't need anything in-house. You just go buy it. Whoever you bought it from manages arguably everything. You're just turning it on and change management and stuff. So, a company that's new to AI and they have a good use case, buy might be smart just to get your feet wet and get some AI use without having to be invested internally with people. But if you really want to have a big impact in the company with AI, eventually you may have to go to build. And it's not just the resource, the cost to build, but having in-house talent, permanently that can support that and then help evolve it.
Right. So now talking about the strategic side of things, if someone wants to build a data transformation roadmap, which you have been doing, so what advices would you give them?
Yeah, so I think it starts, like I said before, with the business strategy. So usually your company have a multi-year strategy. You see what that is. You then look at that to say, okay, from a business process standpoint, how much or how little do we need to change things? And so based on that answer, so then there might be things where it's like, oh, the process isn't really changing. Okay, so there's minimum work to do there. There might be a scenario where the process is completely changing. Like if your business is going from model A to model B, that might be a complete redesign of, from an HR standpoint, even of job descriptions and job titles and what people do and what they're responsible for. Maybe it's going from doing things in a regional manner to doing it consistently in a global manner. That's a lot of work. So you have to define all that first. So business process is the biggest part of the transformation, because that's really what's changing. Technology is not what's changing, because technology will come and go. You'll buy a tool, you'll keep it, you'll swap it out with another one. They're a dime a dozen most of the time. It's the business process. So that's the transformation, is the business process. And the business is going to define kind of what that process needs to be, or the people in the business, right? And then the technology, the data then needs to enable that, right? So it's very important that it flows that way. And it's not just technology and data people saying, hey, there's a tool that does this, we should change because this tool is cool. It's like, no. What's the business process? What does it need to change to? Great. Now, do we need new technology or not to enable this new business process? Do we need different data or data structured in another way to enable this business process? Yes or no? So you kind of just go through those steps, and then that creates your roadmap. Then you'll have kind of short-term wins. What I would recommend is, a lot of transformation projects, they're challenging. They take a long time, multi-year. And so the risk is that you start something and you don't start to see any value until like a year or two. You need to kind of create the roadmap where there's at least some sort of quarterly release of something, even if it's not complete. Because if the business isn't seeing tangible business value somewhat quickly, then it's just a black hole, it's a money pit as far as they're concerned. And then, fingers crossed, in 2 years, you come to the table with something. And if you don't, then it's like, well, we just wasted this time and money. We haven't seen anything. So you have to pepper in small deliverables that bring value, knowing that the big bang thing is, down the road. So you kind of have to balance those two things. And that's where I see, a lot of people miss the mark, is there's these big bang projects, but they don't have enough smaller tangible wins along the way, which is kind of what you need to do.
Yes, I think that's a very good takeaway, which I see here, that you need to be able to, as we always say, break the problem into smaller objectives.
Yeah.
And once you have the small wins, all the small wins will contribute with a vision to a bigger goal that you want to achieve across the time, is what
exactly. Just break off a sliver all the way through and just do a sliver of it, instead of trying to do the whole chunk of step 1, the whole chunk of step 2, 3. Just find a sliver of steps 1 through 10 and just do the sliver and say, look, it works. And then you work on the chunks in parallel, right? Yeah.
Yes. I think that's a great advice. And it's very easier said than done. I can tell you that.
It certainly is. It certainly is. And based on how much you're transforming as a business, sometimes it's tough to find the small things, but they're there. You just have to be creative.
Yes, very true. So my last question to you is, like we are discussing the approach of how really you do all these things and bring the puzzles together, is how should they approach building a center of excellence for data and AI, and how should they choose the right use cases, or the small wins or the big wins that we talk about are ultimately the business use cases to ensure return on investments?
Yeah, so I think you need to know what your end goal is especially when you start getting into AI, because it can be quite expensive if you don't have a destination, right? If you're just on a boat in the ocean, just going somewhere, like where are you going? You gotta be going towards an island or something, right? And so having a clear target is one. Knowing what the return on that investment is going to be is the other, because then that can dictate, okay, we can spend up to this before it's no longer valuable to us. Because you can easily overspend on AI, get the widget, it works great, but it's not, there is no return on that investment. You're actually losing money. You've invested way more than you should have to get the thing, right? So that's super important. But I think having in-house talent is very, very important, because there's a lot of reasons for that. But obviously you can outsource anything, but who's gonna kind of quality or gut check the person you're outsourcing it to? If you don't have any internal knowledge, they can just take you to the cleaners, they can tell you whatever, and what do you know? So you have to know enough to be dangerous, and you have to know enough to eventually have a team that can do it. And then outsourcing it is just, hey, I need extra hands. I need to accelerate work and get it done in 1 month instead of 3. So I'm going to outsource stuff. But you don't want to outsource the strategy. You don't want to outsource the vision. You don't want to outsource the measurement of the ROI. You just want to outsource the hands to help push buttons and build things, right? And I see a lot of companies that they're eager to get going in AI. They either haven't, or for whatever reason aren't making investments to bring internal competency in AI in-house. So they outsource it, and then they wonder why they've spent $20 million and they don't really have anything to show for it, right? Because no one's there to really gut check that internally. So I think even if it's one person, bring in someone who's your AI person that can be the governance council, if you will, even if it's one person. I mean, you got to start somewhere. Right. So that would be the biggest recommendation, is focus on in-house. And maybe it's someone that already has a job doing something else, and 20%, 40% of their time is going to be dedicated towards AI. We've had some people that are like that, right. And now we flip them 100% to AI. But you got to start somewhere. Don't have nobody. You'll get in trouble. Yeah.
Right. I think that's a very golden piece of advice that you gave there. So Nick, thank you very much, coming to this podcast and sharing your knowledge with us. And I just want to say that, there are very few people you come across in our industry who are who operate very swiftly at the intersection of technology and business. So I feel that you are one of them. So it's there's a lot to learn from you for the community and the audience that we are speaking for. And really thankful again, for coming to the podcast. And we wish you all the best for your future endeavors.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.